Okay, welcome to day 2 of quadrilaterals. So first we're going to be looking at this classification of quadrilaterals chart. And I just want to show you again that remember, a quadrilateral, the definition of a quadrilateral is a four-sided polygon. Any shape that has four sides is a quadrilateral. Now sometimes quadrilaterals can be classified as other things. One thing they can be classified as is as a parallelogram. And to be a parallelogram, you need two pairs, a parallel and congruent means equal sides. So a quadrilateral can just be a quadrilateral. It can also be a parallelogram. And within parallelograms, you can have other things that are parallelograms, but they're something else. So a rectangle is part of the parallelogram family, if you would say. And the difference between a rectangle and just any other parallelogram is it also has four right angles. Now, on the another type of parallelogram that is not a rectangle, but it also is a parallelogram, is a rhombus. And the difference between a rhombus and a regular parallelogram is it has four congruent sides. And again, congruent means equal. Now, a square is a parallelogram, but it's also a rectangle because of what makes a rectangle is at four right angles. It's also a rhombus because it has four congruent sides. So a square is all those things. Now, over here in La La Land, right, is the trapezoid. A trapezoid is not a parallelogram because it only has one pair of parallel sides, but it is still in a quadrilateral. Okay, so now this little chart, you're just filling in, just like what that showed on that, and you're just going to be basically filling in this chart. So, well, we know we're classifying quadrilaterals. So up at the top, we're going to put quadrilaterals because all these things are quadrilaterals. That's why this red circle is encompassing all of them. Now, you've got two types of quadrilaterals. You've got your, what's the one that was all by itself? Over here alone is our trapezoid. So I go back and I find trapezoid and I'm going to drag that over here because trapezoids are all by themselves. They only have one set of parallel lines. Now, over here, we have, what's the top of this one over here? The parallelogram. So I'm going to drag parallelogram up here. And remember, there's two types. Well, there's three different types of parallelograms. We've got our rectangle over here with four right angles. And on the other side, we have our rhombus. And then the one that's in the middle that is not only a parallelogram, but also a rectangle and also a rhombus is our square. So that's basically just showing what this chart here shows. Okay, so now, what is both a rectangle and a rhombus? Well, which one is both a rectangle and a rhombus? Our square. Which is a parallelogram with four congruent sides? Well, remember, if you look at this chart, which one has four congruent sides? Our rhombus has four congruent sides. Which is a quadrilateral with two pairs of parallel sides? Two pairs of parallel sides. So if we go back to this chart, two pairs of parallel sides, and it's right here, our parallelogram. I can't say it. This is a polygon with four sides and four angles. So it doesn't say anything about the sides being parallel. So if it's just a polygon with four sides and four angles, that's our quadrilateral. That's the most basic you can get. A quadrilateral with one pair, which one of these only has one pair? Well, we know it's our little trapezoid. It's all by itself because it only has one pair of parallel sides. And then finally, which is a parallelogram with four right angles, and that is our rectangle. Remember, to be a rectangle, it needs four right angles. Okay, so now we've done that. Now we've got a little always, sometimes, never. It's a little game, right? So if it always can be it, we're going to put it here. If it sometimes can be it, and then if never, it's going to go here. And you'll notice there's spaces for each one. So Is a parallelogram is blank a rhombus? So is a parallelogram always a rhombus, sometimes a rhombus, or never a rhombus? Well, again, if you look at our chart, a parallelogram can sometimes be a rhombus, right? But is it always a rhombus? No. So I'm going to put that under sometimes. It's sometimes a rhombus. Sometimes it can be a rectangle, sometimes it can be a square, right? And then a rhombus, now this is a little tricky. A rhombus is blank a parallelogram. Now, is a rhombus always a parallelogram? Well, here we have parallelogram up here. So a rhombus is down here. And so yes, a rhombus is always going to be a parallelogram because to be a rhombus, it has to have parallel and equal sides. So that's where it gets a little tricky. A rhombus is always a parallelogram, but a parallelogram is not always a rhombus. Okay. A parallelogram is it always a square? Sometimes a square or never a square? Well, again, if you look at our chart, here's squares and here's parallelograms. So sometimes a parallelogram can be a square. A parallelogram is a rectangle. Again, the same thing. Sometimes a parallelogram can be a rectangle. A square is blank a rectangle. Well, if we go back to our chart here, here's our square, and it's always a rectangle and it's always a rhombus. So a square is always a rectangle because the definition of a rectangle is 4 right angles. A rectangle is blank a parallelogram. Well, a rectangle is always a parallelogram because it's part of the parallelogram family. It's always a parallelogram. Okay. And then a square is blank a rhombus. Well, again, the same thing. Remember, a square is always a rectangle. It's always a rhombus. So yes, it's always. And then finally, a square is a trapezoid. And the square is never a trapezoid because remember, to be a trapezoid, you only have one pair of parallel sides. And a square has 2 sets because it's a parallelogram. 2 sets of parallel and equal sides. So that's our lesson for today, classifying quadrilaterals. Thank you.